All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Have you ever really thought about what it actually takes to grab a message written thousands of years ago and make it completely understandable right now today? Well, we're going to dive into some absolutely fascinating insights from Dr. George Payton, all about the complex, totally multi-layered world of Bible translation. It's kind of like a giant puzzle.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll cover 5 main areas. First, the cryptic nature of language. Then, the 2,000-year knowledge gap. Third, defining a good translation. Fourth, paratext, which is outside the text. And finally, scripture engagement in culture.
Okay, starting off with section 1, the cryptic nature of language.
To really grasp translation, we first have to tackle a fundamental problem. Human communication is, by its very nature, underspecified. Look, if I walk up to you and say, Dallas won the game on Sunday, it seems perfectly clear, right? But it actually relies on a massive amount of totally unsaid information. Dr. Payton points out that if you just translate those literal words to someone from a completely different culture, they're going to look at you blankly and ask, wait, what's a Dallas and what's a game?
This perfectly captures what we call the economy of language. We constantly leave things out, basically assuming our listener can just fill in the blanks. Like, if you're an American football fan, you know Dallas means the Cowboys. You know the game means professional football. You know what happens on Sundays. And honestly, you probably even know how terrible their season is going. But you see, you didn't need me to explicitly explain all of that.
We naturally rely on this shared encyclopedic knowledge to communicate efficiently. Otherwise, we'd be exhausting our listeners with endless, tedious details. We share situational context, generational slang, cultural expectations, deep worldview values, all of it. This shared knowledge, it's literally the invisible glue holding every single conversation together. So, moving on to section 2, the 2,000-year knowledge gap.
Now, you might be wondering, what happens when we don't share any of that encyclopedic knowledge? Well, think about this. We're separated from the New Testament by roughly 2 millennia. 2,000 years. That completely strips away the shared knowledge we need to intuitively fill in those communication gaps. The biblical authors were writing directly to their contemporaries, people who shared their culture, their geography, their exact worldview. And, well, we simply aren't those people. Because of this massive gap, a strict word-for-word literal translation often just carries those ancient gaps right over, leaving the modern reader entirely confused. Sure, it might be mathematically precise to the ancient words, but if the reader can't fill in the implied context, the communication completely fails. A meaning-based approach, on the other hand, intentionally steps in to fill those gaps and tear down those barriers to understanding. Which brings us nicely to section 3, defining a good translation. How do translators actually solve this problem proactively? They establish what's called a translation brief right at the start of a project. It's a document outlining specific expectations. Basically, they use 5 core metrics as their ultimate goal and standard of measurement. The text must be accurate to the original, absolutely, but it also has to sound natural in the target language. It has to be clear. Plus, it must be acceptable to the community. Like, if they expect formal language and you hand them casual slang, they're going to reject it. And finally, it needs to be impactful. Here's the absolute crucial point. A text that's just sitting unread on a shelf because it sounds too formal or unnatural or just utterly confusing, that's a failure of communication. Dr. Payton actually experienced this firsthand in Tanzania. A community there outright rejected a rapidly translated Bible simply because they didn't like the way it sounded. Seriously, if the audience doesn't understand it or flat out won't read it, the translation hasn't actually succeeded.
All right, section 4, paratext, outside the text.
Sometimes we just can't fix the gaps by adjusting the text itself because, we still need to stay faithful to the original words. So what do? We expand our toolkit to the next tier of solutions, paratext. These are the essential tools that do the heavy lifting of orienting the reader, all without actually altering the core scripture. We're talking about the supplemental material that's bound right there within the physical cover of the book itself. We're talking about things like footnotes, which are absolutely essential for literal translations to explain weird ancient idioms, or glossaries to help define totally unknown concepts like Pharisees or the temple. And get this, translating these tools is a massive project all on its own. Dr. Payton noted that his team once had to literally invent a phrase for glossary. They called it new words. And then they had to figure out how to translate the instruction, look for this word among the new words, just to create a functional cross-reference. Wild, right? Let me give you a perfect example of why these tools, especially book introductions, are so powerful. Take the book of Micah.
Dr. Payton shared a story about a translation team working on this book, and at first, the local readers had absolutely no idea what was going on. But then the translators provided an introduction explaining that Micah is actually structured like an ancient court case, where God is bringing charges against an unfaithful Israel. Boom, everything clicked. The readers actually asked for a longer, multi-page introduction because that frame of reference was just so vital to them. And that leads us to our final section, Section 5, Scripture Engagement in Culture. Finally, we have to step completely outside the physical book to see how the culture actually interacts with the translation. This is known as scripture engagement. It's this massive, incredibly intentional effort to ensure the translated text actually lives and breathes within the target community. Because honestly, you could translate the most perfect book in the world, but if you don't engage the community with it, your job is only half done.
Audio is a wildly powerful gateway here. I mean, historically, Charles Wesley told his brother John that people who couldn't read were learning deep theology just by singing hymns. Those songs outlasted spoken sermons by centuries. And today, we have amazing digital tools like scripture app readers that highlight words on a smartphone while a narrator reads them out loud. It perfectly merges audio and visual learning.
Artwork has always filled these historical gaps too. Just think about Michelangelo painting the entire biblical narrative across the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel for a population that, for the most part, couldn't read. Today, that translates into things like live drama, dance, and video productions like the Jesus film. By combining visual arts, music, and performance, you completely bypass literary barriers and engage human emotion directly. Translators also use highly tailored tactics to reach very specific groups. They'll hold literacy classes so people can eventually read the text for themselves. They set up audio listening groups, which provide a really safe way for people of other faiths, like Muslim or Hindu neighbors, to engage with the stories without feeling like they're betraying their own culture. They even print standalone booklets just to explain foreign concepts, like what a camel is or how an ancient altar worked. And sometimes this engagement happens before the actual text is even read. There's this amazing example from an Asian community where translators helped locals create a traditional sung and danced ode about a king of glory who came to save them. The locals performed this long before they ever held a translated New Testament. It sparked such intense curiosity about who this Jesus person was that it completely paved the way for the actual text to be eagerly received. All of this boils down to a favorite word of Dr. Payton's: intentionality. Back in the day, translators might have just focused on finishing the book and walking away. But today, modern translation agencies fundamentally recognize that producing audio, visual, and oral materials is just as vital as translating the words on the page. It absolutely has to be a planned, core part of the whole ethos right from day one. Ultimately, all of this intentionality points toward one really profound goal: the painstaking work of analyzing the cryptic nature of language, building accurate texts, crafting helpful paratexts, and launching cultural engagement. It all serves one purpose: to transform ancient foreign words into a direct, life-changing conversation that people can truly feel in their own hearts and their own culture. It really puts human communication into perspective, doesn't it? If a 2,000-year-old message requires this much intentionality to be understood, how much of our own daily communication relies entirely on the unspoken? Thank you so much for joining this explainer. I really hope mapping out this massive historical translation gap leaves you thinking deeply about the invisible gaps, unspoken assumptions, and shared knowledge present in every single conversation you have today.